Good evening and welcome to Copperfields Books virtual event with Gina Wilkinson. My name is Jamie Madsen and I'm the marketing and events coordinator here at Copperfields Books, and I'll also be your host for the evening. So without further ado, I'm really excited about tonight's author, Gina Wilkinson. Gina is an award-winning journalist, author, former foreign correspondent, and documentary maker who's reported from some of the world's most intriguing and perilous places for the BBC, NPR, ABC, and other renowned public broadcasters. During 2 decades living and working in hotspots across the globe, she spent more than a year in Baghdad under Saddam Hussein. At that time, Iraq was virtually sealed off from the outside world, and Gina lived under tight surveillance. One of her closest Iraqi friends even worked as a secret police informant, reporting on her every move. Gina now works in international development, supporting efforts to end poverty in the developing world. Currently, she's with us from Australia, and she's, I guess, with us this afternoon there, but tonight here to chat about her debut novel, When the Apricots Bloom. And I'm really excited. I've read some of your stuff in the past, and I really am interested to see maybe how your characters align with some of your background experience. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you. Why don't you take it away?
Oh, thank you so much, Jamie. And thank you to Copperfields Books for hosting me here tonight. Very excited to see you all, and wonderful to get such awesome support from an indie bookstore. Go indie bookstores. I'm going to do a little presentation. I thought it might be fun to have something to look at for the next 20 minutes apart from just this. So I've put a little PowerPoint together. That's going to take about 20 minutes. And then, like Jamie said, please send any questions you have or anything you want to share. We can dive right into that. I'm going to try and share my screen now and get this party started, as they say. You can see here, I've titled this presentation, Secrets, Spies, and Friendship, Fact Meets Fiction, Iraq's Amazing Art Scene, and a Book Market to Blow Your Mind. So those are some of the topics that we're going to be discussing tonight. A few of you are probably wondering where my accent is from. I am actually Australian. I'm in Australia right now, and I grew up in Western Australia, over here, one of the most remote regions in the world, actually, in a variety of very small towns. My parents moved around a lot when I was a kid, and that continued into my adult life. Here you can see a photo of me in Basra, actually, in Iraq. I didn't always go around kitted up in outfits like this, actually very rarely, but this is pre-selfie days, and I actually have very few photos of me in Iraq. I was in radio, so not much film or photography going on in my life, and not really a selfie girl as it is, so here we go. And these stars represent some of the places that I lived and worked in for about 20 years. You can see a few spots over here, a few stars over here in North America. I met my husband when I was living in Vancouver. He's Canadian. And later on, we lived in New York for a couple of years. My oldest boy was born there. And more recently, we spent about 6 years in Washington, D.C. So I have quite a strong connection to the United States. So I'm very glad to be here with you all tonight. And right now I'm speaking to you from Melbourne, over here on the east coast of Australia. We moved back from Washington, D.C. to Australia about a year and a half ago. And I live here with my husband, my 2 boys who are just becoming teenagers, and my hairless Sphinx cat, Obi-Wan. I figured the intersection between book lovers and cat lovers is fairly strong, so I thought I would share a shot of him. He is great if you have allergies to cats. This is the sort of cat you can have. And you can see he is a lover of wine, flowers, all the finer things in life. And he originally hails from Delaware, so we have a wide variety of nationalities in our family. All right, so that is enough about me and my history. I'm going to tell you a little bit now about my book, When the Apricots Bloom, which is published by Kensington Books. And this actually was inspired by events in my real life. Back in 2002, as Jamie mentioned, I was working as a journalist. I was based at that time in Bangkok, and my husband, who had followed me from Canada to Australia and then Australia to Thailand, was offered a job to go and work for UNICEF, the United Nations Children's Fund in Baghdad. It was about a year or so before the start of the Iraq War, when the country was still ruled by the dictator Saddam Hussein. And we were told at that time to expect a fairly quiet posting. It was actually just prior to President George Bush's very famous Axis of Evil speech. So we went in expecting to have a fairly quiet time. Saddam Hussein really had an iron grip on the country, so not much happened without his say-so, and it was virtually cut off from the outside world. Due to international sanctions, you couldn't fly into the country. There were very few foreigners. People tended to keep a very low profile, rather than attracting unnecessary attention from the regime. That went for locals and foreigners alike. And not long after I arrived, as Jamie mentioned, I was befriended by a local woman who I later discovered was actually working as an informant for the secret police, reporting back on where I went, who I met, who I talked to, things like that. Now, I should definitely point out that I do not blame her at all for that. In Iraq at that time, if the secret police wanted something from you, for an ordinary Iraqi, saying no was almost impossible, especially for someone like my friend who came from a very humble background and had a family to protect. And throughout the years, I continued to wonder, was there part of our friendship that was real? Was it just an unpleasant duty for her? Was it just a job that she had to perform, or were we really friends? And so that inspired me to start writing this book. And in fact, the very first scene begins with an Iraqi secretary who works at the home of an Iraqi secretary. She works at a foreign embassy, and the secret police come knocking at her door late at night, demanding that she spy on her boss's wife. And if she doesn't, they're going to conscript her teenage son into a militia run by Huda Hussein, who was Saddam's son. So I really wanted to use this character, who I named Huda, the secretary, as a way to look at how do people respond when they're placed under extreme pressure, when they're in extreme circumstances, especially when those circumstances run contrary to their own morals or their own sense of ethics. Do they give in straight away? Do they resist? How do they negotiate that situation? And where do they draw the line? These were the sort of questions that I wanted to examine, particularly through the character of Huda. So while the plot is fiction, the starting point that drew me to begin writing this story was based on that real life experience. And there are bits and pieces of my real experience scattered throughout. One of the other things that inspired me to write this book is something quite different, and that is Iraq's amazing art scene. When I got to Baghdad, I was so happy to discover that it actually had about 24 independent art galleries, and these were a real lifeline for me. Here you can see some of the artists who were operating around that time. This is Amr Al-Obaidi, Ismail Kayat. These works are by Lubna Musa. This is a collage that she created, and this is a work that she did recently, actually, very recently. This is acrylic on canvas. And here we have a piece by Widad Orfali. She was really a trailblazing female Iraqi artist, very widely respected. And this is a work by Ismail Fatah, who unfortunately is no longer with us. These reflect my own personal taste in art, but you could find anything there, any style of art: classical, painting, impressionist, modern, people sculpting, people painting in oils, all sorts of different mediums. And throughout millennia, actually, Iraq has really been at the forefront of artistic culture, and artists in Iraq in the past, and even to an extent when I was there and today, they formed a sort of the conduit between the outside world and the more closed Iraqi society. Not that it was closed, but they were the thing that often connected these two societies, the outside and the inside world. And I found that for me in my own case. Many of my Iraqi friends, in fact, the vast majority of them, were reluctant to be seen with me in public. And that's because that would attract the attention of the secret police. And that is definitely something no one would want in their life. But at art galleries, I could meet with Iraqis, talk to Iraqis, and we had a reason to be there together. And I'm really grateful for that, because I was able to make some great friends and also experience some great artwork and artistic culture in Baghdad. And so I used that experience to create the character of Rania. And Rania is also one of the central characters in this book. She is an art gallery operator or owner. She owns an art gallery. And she's also an estranged childhood friend of Huda's. I'm not going to go into why they're not friends anymore, but I don't want to do any spoilers, but they haven't spoken to each other in, decades. And when we meet Rania, she is actually at another of my all-time favorite places in Baghdad. And that is Mutanabi Market. You can see a couple of photos I took here of Mutanabi Market. It's on a beautiful walking street in the old part of the city with beautiful Ottoman era street. And there are books as far as the eye can see. You can find beautiful engraved Qurans like the ones in this photo here, rare books, and then you can find all sorts of books and magazines in a multitude of languages. And this was a place I really loved visiting. And so I set the first chapter where we meet Rania in Mutanabi Market. And she's there visiting a shop very much like this one. I guess this would be Baghdad's version of the independent bookstore. So wonderful things, independent bookstores, great treasures. And the scene is set in a shop very much like this, with books that go to the ceiling. You can smell the paper and the ink. And Rania is there because while she was actually born in quite wealthy circumstances, she's the daughter of a sheikh. She, over time, her family has lost their power and money, and she is there selling off the final remnants of her grandfather's once great library. So that is where we meet Rania, at Mutanabi bookstore. There's also a third character, a third woman, who eventually brings Rania and Huda back into contact. And that is the character of the diplomat's wife. Her name is Ali. Now, a lot of people ask if I am Ali or if Ali is me. And, we have some similarities and some differences. I was a journalist, as I mentioned, at that time, and the character of Ali is also a journalist whose husband gets posted to Iraq. Saddam Hussein did not allow foreign journalists to live in Iraq, so I decided to put my career on hold. I was all right with that. My husband had been following me around the world for quite a while. And also, even though I wasn't going to be able to work or practice my craft as a journalist, I was still intrigued by the idea of going to a country, and especially a city like Baghdad, that has been at the center of so many pivotal events in ancient history and in modern history. And the fact that it was so isolated and cut off was actually made it slightly more intriguing for me. Journalists, we like to get, I guess, the inside scoop on things that are concealed and to know what's really going on. So I went there using just as with a visa that Ali uses. It's got a terrible name. It's called the dependent spouse category. So I was Baghdad's only foreign dependent spouse at the time, and Ali also goes in using this similar awfully named visa category. Unlike Ali, I did not sit around for too long feeling isolated and lonely. You know, I did for a while, I got to admit, it was a big change in my own lifestyle. But unlike Ali, I quickly went out and started looking for work, and I eventually found a job working part-time for the UN Oil for Food program. So that is one difference. The other main difference between me and Ali is that I did not go around poking into sensitive matters. I knew that I was being watched. In fact, before I went into Baghdad, I was given a briefing by the UN, and I was told to assume that my house would be bugged, that my phone would be bugged, the office would definitely be bugged. And if my husband and I wanted to have a private conversation that we didn't want the authorities to hear, we should go for a walk, or at least go into our garden. So yeah, we really got our steps in Baghdad. Not that we had any secrets or access to any information, any special secrets, but I guess it was just that feeling of wanting to have some privacy. Here you can see some photos I took after the ousting of Saddam Hussein. Prior to that, I had been warned not to take a camera out in public. So you can see here, these are some of the murals and monuments that were erected in Baghdad. They've been defaced now after the war. But at the time, it was said that there were 5 million statues, billboards, and murals of Baghdad in Baghdad. That was like one to watch over each person in the city. And it really did feel like that. And in the book, I write about a billboard that is outside Ali's house, and it's a billboard with Saddam Hussein on like an old style rotary telephone. And quite often she looks out at him and she feels like he's watching her. And that billboard was outside my house. I modeled that on the real billboard, and I did quite often feel like he was watching me. So that is a similarity. But, you know, I would say the big difference is that Ali is investigating a secret. So she is sort of snooping around. And, you know, I definitely tried not to do anything that would get me in trouble before the war, or even more importantly, get my Iraqi friends or any Iraqis who were around at the time in trouble. Because while I had a relative degree of protection, because I was there connected with the United Nations, ordinary Iraqis didn't have that. So I was very careful before the war not to do anything that might get someone else in trouble. So there's actually a fourth character in the book, and this is sort of related to Ali's secret, or her mission in Iraq. Many of you probably already know about some of Iraq's ancient history. It's called the Cradle of Civilization. Sometimes that area is referred to as the Fertile Crescent, the land between the Euphrates and the Tigris River. And the Tigris actually runs right through Baghdad. So that pops up frequently in the book, in the setting. You know, this is a society that invented the first writing system, the first legal code, the wheel, the plow. So they've made amazing contributions to society as a whole. So you're probably familiar with that, but there's another part of Iraqi history, another period of Iraqi history that is very dear to many of my Iraqi friends. And that is a period called the Golden Years. And this is the it's the 1960s and the early 1970s. This is a time when Baghdad was the most cosmopolitan city in the Middle East. The Tigris was lined with cafes and beautiful restaurants, and there were even casinos. And in fact, one of my Iraqi friends told me a story about how he used to go water skiing on the Tigris. And no one did that when I was there, because Saddam had built several palaces right on the river with his head engraved in these huge towers. And so the river had basically become off limits. So it was a very quiet place when I was there. But people still talked about the golden years. There were a lot of tourists that came to Baghdad from Europe, from the UK at that time. There were a lot of expats, Americans working in the oil business, and also women who went there to work as teachers and to work as nurses. And Ali's mother was a nurse in Baghdad. Ali's mum died when she was very young, so she's there to try and find out some answers about her mum's past as well. So I guess those are the three main characters: Huda, the secretary; Rania, the art gallery owner; Ali, the diplomat's wife. And for me, I feel like Baghdad, I tried to make that into the fourth character. And so that's all I'll say about the story. I don't want to go into too many details because some of you might want to read it. But I'll talk a little bit about how I turned fact into fiction. This is a photo that I took just around the corner from Mutanabbi Market. These two girls were getting ready to go to their aunt's wedding. And I used this photo in particular quite often when I was writing scenes about the childhood connection between Huda and Rania. Rania is a little bit older and more sophisticated, so I often sort of thought of Rania as this little girl, and Huda is younger and a little bit more reserved. So I used my own photos, my own records from that time, sound recordings. And I also did what all journalists, all novelists do, I should say. I did a lot of research into various strands and themes that come up in the book. Huda is the granddaughter of a fortune teller, and in Iraq it's quite often to tell people's fortunes through the coffee grounds that remain in their cup after you have coffee. So I did a lot of research into what the various squiggles in the grinds might mean, how the process of, how you would actually go about the process of reading somebody's fortune. Here you can see postcards of the sort that Ali's mother might have sent from Baghdad. Ali comes across a cache of her mother's old postcards. And here we have just some diagrams of some small bird bones. I wrote a couple of scenes where Huda is a child and has a make-believe set of runes when she pretends that she's a fortune teller, and she's got a little bag with some coins and some seashells and some bird bones, and her and Rania throw these runes across the ground, and then they try to predict what their futures will be in these runes. So I use this as part of my writing process and inspiration. But one of my other big inspirations was my Iraqi friends. Several of them helped me a lot with this book. 3 of them in particular read the entire manuscript and helped me with feedback to make sure I got the details right. That was very important to me. But also just their amazing encouragement to keep going. It was, it took me quite a long time to write this book, and it was great to get their support throughout that. But also in terms of inspiration, my Iraqi friends, particularly my female friends, they have been through a lot, and they are real survivors. They never gave up, and they also never got cynical. They didn't become bitter, and we went through a lot together, especially after the fall of Saddam Hussein, during that very chaotic and violent time at the start of the Iraq War. And I, found them personally to be a huge support for me. They kept my spirits up and kept me going during some of the toughest times in my own life. And I personally found that very inspiring. So I wanted to convey some of that strength and that resilience and that sisterhood, I guess, in this story and through these characters. So, you know, if you read it, I hope you get a sense of that. And I guess that's about all I have to say for the moment. And I'm going to stop sharing the screen. Or first, actually, I'm going to thank Copperfields Books for hosting me tonight. Wonderful independent bookstore. We're very lucky to have these indie bookstores in our lives, that's for sure, and for hosting this event. And I'm very happy to answer any questions you might have after this, or if you want to send me an email at any time, you can find me at ginawilkinson.net. I've got a little newsletter you can sign up. I talk about what's happening with my book, books I'm reading, like recommendations, and various other things, the occasional photo of my cat, Obi-Wan. Last issue, I included a cocktail recipe for anyone who is suffering the terrible Arctic temperatures that you guys have been going through in North America. Just in case you're interested, it's very easy. Earl Grey tea and a shot of Bailey's. I named it after where I lived in DC, which was Tacoma Park. I called it the Tacoma Fog. So you get little snippets like that. And I'm also reasonably active on Instagram. So you can always contact me there as well. So that's about it for me. So if anybody's got any questions, feel free.
Oh my goodness, Gina, that was fantastic. I mean, I have so many questions and we do have some here. So I will put mine to the side. And I really appreciate you including that slideshow. It really helped put things in perspective.
Oh, good. Great. Thank you.
Okay, so Janet, who came in a moment late, is wondering where the title came from. Good question.
Yeah, actually, this is an Arabic saying. It is something like, well, it's similar to, but much more beautiful than when pigs fly. It means a very fleeting opportunity or something that is very difficult to achieve or can only be achieved in a very fleeting moment. So there's a scene where Huda's a secret police handler is putting pressure on her and she's trying to delay him, and he says, you know, well, you know, if things were different, we could wait till the apricots bloom. And so I tried to use that in the title, just a little nod to that awesome Arabic saying. The Arabic language actually is extremely beautiful and they have so many beautiful sayings to draw from. So I was lucky with that.
Thanks for answering that. That's super interesting. It's kind of like how every culture has their, you have your cake and eat it too type of thing.
Yes.
Okay, so a question we're getting from a few people. How did you discover that your friend was spying on you?
Yes, I did suspect something was up. She had no worries at all about being seen with me in public. And, you know, the more I grew to know about Baghdad, the stranger that became. She invited me around to her house, which also was unusual. And she really tried to control my life. So she wanted to know, you know, who I was with, who I had spoken to, and if I was out with anybody else. I, you know, originally put it down to sort of jealousy, but it's funny, you know, I mentioned it to some of my foreign friends because I would never have talked about that sort of suspicion with my Iraqi friends under Saddam Hussein because, you know, you don't want to get anyone in trouble. But my foreign friends all said I was being paranoid. But after the war, she actually lost her job as a result of it. Other Iraqis came forward and, you know, there was a period where people who had played more than a passive role, more than just answering questions, did lose their jobs. And she is now re-employed. But I think that Iraqi society had to come to terms with that, had to, you know, go through a sort of reconciliation and also learn to forgive people that did, cooperate in some ways or show compassion and understanding for how they may have had no choice. But when people are in, an oppressive environment, of course, you are going to be resentful. And when it comes to an end, that people are going to want what they see as justice. So, it's quite a complicated situation. And, I personally don't have anything against her at all for that. I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to write this book, and, people often, when they hear just the first bit, oh, I was friends with a woman who was an informant, they're like, oh my gosh, what a terrible thing. But I hope that when people read this book, they are going to be thinking, well, what would I have done? Would I have done the same thing? And, personally, I, probably would have done the same thing as her. So that's something that I hope people get out of that. And that's why I think fiction can be so important, especially now when society feels so divided. It's a way that we can walk in someone else's shoes and we can get an understanding of why people do things and why they make the mistakes that they do, because that's also something that is prevalent in society, at the moment with the rise of social media and so on. We're sort of very quick to condemn, but we are all human. And, especially under extreme circumstances, people can make uncharacteristic mistakes and find themselves in situations that they never thought they would be in.
That's my question is, I know you guys crossed paths and it was kind of forced in a way. And I have this feeling like she had to do it as well. Do you think you guys were actually friends, like among it all the chaos, like, she had to do it. Maybe you felt you had to have her around. Did you?
Yeah, I don't know. There were many things about her personality that I really liked. She was funny and outgoing, and but you can't really know what another person's thoughts are. My gut tells me that we probably were to an extent, but I guess this is why more than 10 years later I started writing this book, because that was a question that I still had. And I guess in a way, novelists perhaps are drawn to writing these stories because you can have a resolution, and real life actually is much messier than even like books with the strangest plot twists. I actually, one thing I found was when I tried to insert certain real life events that really happened, when I put them on the page of a novel, they became completely unbelievable. And if I'd showed them to an editor, they would be like, no one's going to believe that, even though it came from real life. Because in a novel, you have to set the scene, your characters have to, you have to show the motivation for everything that they do in a way. Even if you've hidden it, it has to make sense in the end. Whereas, from my experience working in war zones, especially other extreme environments, cowards, people that are cowardly can suddenly do something extremely courageous. People who are highly ethical can sometimes make completely, uncharacteristic mistakes. But, so I guess real life is much messier than fiction. And perhaps that's why we love books so much, because we can get answers that we perhaps can't get. And for me, I could ask questions and investigate issues that perhaps I wasn't able to at the time or didn't have enough courage to address at the time. Yeah.
I really love that answer. Thank you.
No.
Okay, we have a question from Rosanna. She's wondering, did you speak English with people in Iraq or Farsi?
Oh, okay. Farsi, I think that is in Pakistan. Arabic is what they speak in Baghdad. So it depends. With my friends, actually, Iraq was once a colony of Britain. So there's a lot of English spoken among older people. And with my friends, generally I spoke English, and which was great because we could get to know each other, on a very deep, much deeper level. English to them is like a second language. But I also studied Arabic almost every single day. And I used my Arabic a lot out in the street when I would go shopping and when I would be at Mutanabi book market, when I would go and do my grocery shopping in the markets and taxi drivers, actually any opportunity that I had. As a journalist, I also used it sometimes just to make a connection, because also Iraqis love it if you can speak some Arabic. And it was funny, you know, I went to Iraq and had this experience of being, you know, a housewife or the dependent spouse. And later I encountered a former colleague of mine, a journalist who had been working in Lebanon. And he said, oh, I've been studying Arabic too. And so he started talking to me, and this was at a point when the war hadn't actually started. I was still a sort of a dependent spouse, part-time worker. And his vocabulary was all things like, long live the revolution, and all this political language, whereas mine was, can I have half a kilo of tomatoes? And no, I don't have any children yet. And, you know, that sort of thing. So we had a completely different language or realm of language that we operated in at that time. So it was interesting to see that contrast.
Wow. That's funny. I'm interested. What was the most surprising thing you found among your research? You know, I really love that you went into, you know, kind of the history, and then you even, you know, you had pictures of plants, and I just wonder, was there anything you really kind of stumbled upon that surprised you?
Yeah, that is a good question. I don't know if it was so much my research, but I would say the most surprising thing for me was when I went there and discovered the amazing art scene. Because I tried to do research actually before I went into Baghdad to find out what I would be expecting. And, you know, I wrote several times to people in the, you know, UN office and UNICEF saying, you know, what should I expect? And they're all just, wait till you get here. You know, and it was quite mysterious, and there was so little information available. And so for me, that was the biggest surprise, the amazing art scene, and you know, how respected artists are, artists, writers, philosophers. You know, they get a huge amount of respect in Iraqi society if you compare it to like many Western societies. And that was for me like a really great discovery and a huge lifeline. I'm so thankful that they did have an amazing art scene, because like I said, it was one of the few places that I could actually go and meet with Iraqis and not have to worry as much about attracting the attention of the secret police, because we had a reason to be together that wasn't necessarily going to, you know, result in negative consequences for them.
That must have been so wild, but also kind of magical to be in this art scene in Iraq around other people. And, you know, I don't know, it's very interesting. An anonymous attendee is wondering where your boys were born.
Oh yeah, one of my boys was born in New York, so he's a New Yorker, and the other one was born in Bangkok. We lived in Bangkok before we went to Iraq, but then we also lived in Bangkok a second time, much later. So he was born in Bangkok, which is Thailand's another country that I have quite a strong connection to. I've actually lived there for a total of about almost 10 years. So I have quite a strong connection there. So both great cities, New York and Bangkok.
Absolutely. Okay, quick question. What was in those bookstores? The independent bookstores looked awesome, and, you know, from floor to ceiling. What kind of books were in there?
Oh, any book you wanted, you could find at that market. I mean, there were a lot of rare books. Iraq has, you know, a really vibrant intellectual life, and you know, as the economy suffered first with the war with Iran, and then later due to sanctions, people had to sell off their libraries. So I didn't personally go around looking for rare books, but I know there were a lot of rare and valuable books at that, in the market and in the bookstores. I just love that part of town. It was so wonderful. But personally myself, I picked up a copy of an Agatha Christie novel. I think it was called Murder in Baghdad there. I also, weirdly enough, for research purposes, I picked up a copy of the collected speeches of Saddam Hussein. One thing, that I found interesting, I guess, about Iraq is, and one thing that, I try to show in this book as well, is the many things that I had in common with Iraqi women. And I think a lot of readers are going to see similarities in their own lives. Huda is juggling work and home. Her and Rania are both dealing with rebellious teenagers. Huda is always starting diets and then falling off the diet bandwagon, which I can relate to. And there is a scene that I wrote where Ali is asking if she should wear that headscarf, and Huda says, well, that's, why would you do that? And you're not like Muslim. And anyway, in our office, only one woman wears the headscarf and 4 don't. And that was my experience, that very few of my women friends wore the headscarf at that time. In fact, only one of my female friends wore the headscarf. And Iraq was a very secular society at that time. And Saddam Hussein is a terrible dictator, but he was in a way also, it promoted equal opportunities. Women in Iraq had the best legal standing in the Middle East. They drove themselves. My friends were engineers, they were scientists, they were doctors, they were lawyers. Women had high-ranking positions in the government. They had a lot of power in their own households and in the community. And, so Saddam has many, many failings, but he also was, in a way, a champion of women's rights. It was sort of like an equal opportunity oppressor. So, and that is something that comes up in the book as it gets closer to wartime. Saddam Hussein started doing deals with more sort of fundamentalist sections of the religious community that wanted to restrict women's rights, and that comes up in the book. And that's something that did come to pass after the fall of Saddam Hussein. It became a lot more, women suffered a lot more restrictions. There was a lot more pressure on them to do things like wear the headscarf, even if it was not their choice. Like it should be a woman's choice whether she wears the headscarf. But after the war, there was more and more pressure on women to stop driving, to stop working, to start wearing the headscarf. So, these are the unintended consequences of, the actions that we take on the international stage, I guess. And that was something that I wanted to look at too, how the similarities, because I feel like we're so divided at the moment, and many people would probably feel like, well, I would have nothing in common with someone from Iraq, but actually I felt quite at home with my Iraqi friends. And they might bake their bread differently, they might break flat bread, they might pray slightly differently, but at heart I feel like that we have so much in common. And I think that's why fiction is so great, because you can really find out the things that you have in common, which is something that we need right now, I think.
Thanks so much. That was fascinating. Genevieve is wondering how many languages you speak and what languages you speak.
Oh yeah, I am what they call a jack of all trades and a master of none. So the first time I went overseas, I was 17 and I went to live in Brazil for a year as an exchange student. No one spoke English in my town, and I was living with Brazilians. So I did once upon a time speak fluent Portuguese, and it's probably still locked in there, but it's way back in the annals of the passing of time. I speak pretty good Thai. I spoke reasonable Arabic, but again, once I left the Middle East, I only use it occasionally when I go to Arabic restaurants now, and try and impress waiters with which can be a bit dangerous because I'm a bit rusty. So occasionally I'll end up with something completely different than what I thought I was ordering. I studied Japanese at university. So what is that? And then I learned a sprinkling of Sinhala and Tamil when I was living in Sri Lanka. So I like languages, and being a journalist, a lot of my job was going out and meeting people. And if you can at least say a few things, it's such an icebreaker. And yeah, so I enjoy it anyway. And I think once you learn a couple, I think it sort of triggers a part of your brain. It tends to make it a little bit easier to learn the next one and the next one. But yeah, now I'm not really fluent in anything except English, but I can like fake it for a little while so that people think I'm much more fluent than I am based on my initial, intro.
That's awesome. Norma is wondering, can we expect a future novel set in Bangkok?
Oh yeah, I wrote one set in Bangkok before this. Maybe I'll have to dig it up and see how it's aged. I find often when you go back, you finish something and then you go back and you read it again later, you're like, oh my gosh, what was I thinking? But I did set one in Bangkok. It completely, I loved writing that because Bangkok is such a sensory place. It's flashing lights, and it's tropical greenery, and it's humidity and sun, and then the next minute it will be tropical rain, and it's just such a lively environment. So I did write one there. I'm going to thank you, Norma, for reminding me. I'm going to pick it up because my agent, she often says, so have you started writing anything? And during this lockdown, I'm sure there are people out there who have been trying to remote school their kids like I have been doing, and it is a real creativity killer. I'm spending my time on like 7th grade algebra, not thinking of any plots, but actually things are changing in Australia. The situation is getting better here, and my kids have gone back to school, and now I finally have a little bit more time and space to start thinking a bit more seriously about the ideas that have been bubbling around in the background, but not able to get a look in due to, all the crazy circumstances of COVID-19.
Well, all we want to know is that you have something in the works so that we can look forward to it.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah. And one last question here. What year did you leave Iraq?
Yeah, that was the end of 2003.
2003.
A long time ago. Yeah. Well, I often I'm sort of like anti social media, like this, not anti social media, but quite often we see the negative in social media, and just how quick communication has become. But I actually am really grateful to email and Facebook now, because I have been able to stay in contact with my Iraqi friends. When I left, almost like 18 years ago, the phones still weren't functioning. There was no internet, and leaving, I was like, how are we going to stay in touch? And thank goodness, the internet has enabled us to keep in contact, and I'm still, in contact a lot with my Iraqi friends. And I guess, it was such a tough time. It really bonded us. And so I'm so grateful that we still managed to keep these connections, just like I can still keep my connections with my friends in the US and other places where I've lived. So yeah, I guess there's two sides to every coin, but in terms of like keeping in contact with friends and loved ones, it's really been great to be able to stay connected after all these years.
Have you ever thought about a memoir? I think it would be awesome.
Yeah, actually I wrote a narrative nonfiction account of my period in Iraq. Was published in 2008 in Australia. And it's not so much a memoir. When I think of memoir, I sort of think of someone using their life experience to sort of look back at their life and show how things came to pass. Whereas this is more narrative nonfiction. So it's like in the form of a novel. At that time, I would never recommend this to any of you out there who may be thinking of writing a novel. I wrote it in present tense. And I wanted to give like the perspective of how I experienced that moment in time, the last year of Saddam Hussein and the first year of the Iraq War, from my perspective, in that sense of being in a very chaotic and volatile environment. And I deliberately wrote it in present tense to keep it grounded in how I experienced it at that moment, rather than using the benefit of hindsight or the wisdom that you gain over time. So if I wrote a memoir now, it would, you know, I think be very different. But yeah, I did sort of start off in that sort of, I guess, non-fiction, but written in a novel style. And it was probably good therapy at the time. You know, when I left Iraq, I was eventually diagnosed with depression, which took me quite a few years to get over, and PTSD related to some things that happened during the war period. And I remember I was living in Sri Lanka at that time. I went to see a counselor. She was the only psychologist in all of Sri Lanka. It took me a long time to get a meeting with her. And she saw me and she said, you know, if you're plagued by these recurring images or these recurring thoughts about certain things, she said, write it down on a piece of paper and then screw it up and throw it away, which surprisingly worked pretty well in the short term. I don't know necessarily that I would prescribe it for a long-term solution, but in the short term, it was surprisingly effective. And I think, you know, writing that memoir was beneficial in terms of connecting the dots, because, you know,
maybe
I guess
healing in a way.
Yeah, getting things out on paper is a good way to understand things that happened and how things happen, why things happen, because when you're in the middle of it, often it just makes no sense. So, you know, I guess from that perspective, writing is also good therapy and cheaper, but maybe longer or as long.
Well, I'm so grateful to have you with us tonight. And I know it's a long way away. You're in Australia. It's the middle of the day there. But I'm sure many of you have already read it. I can't wait to get my fingers in it. But don't worry if you didn't get any of the links tonight, because I will be sending an email tomorrow that will include a link to this recording. It will include links to purchase the book as well as Gina's website. And yeah, Gina, why don't you take us out? That was fantastic. And I really hope to have you back soon.
Oh, thank you so much, Jamie. Lovely to be here with Copperfields books, just like Mudnabi Market, your you know, own version of the independent book market. Such great assets to our communities. And thank you all for having me and for your awesome questions and just for joining me here tonight. So nice to be connected with my friends in the US.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.